Going live.
And we're back. How you doing today there, Scott?
I'm doing good, Colin.
Good.
Thank you for this juice tonight.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we kind of just pop in when we feel like doing a show now, but it's always good to chat with you and discuss the current crazy things in our world.
Oh, God, man, where do we start on that?
I know.
Christ is King.
Oh yeah.
Christ is King.
Oh man, yeah. God,
I don't even know what's going on. What's up with that?
I don't know. I saw it come across Twitter yesterday or today. I don't know. It's the new. It's anti-Semitic to say that somehow because everything is anti-Semitic now.
Oh yeah. Well, 'tis the season.
Oh
yeah, right. It's been going what 6 months.
I was gonna say 6,000
years.
Yeah. But every so often, I think it's one of those things that it seems to be accelerating because the grift to some extent has been exposed when it comes to certain parts of what's going on there, with Israel. And well, we've seen it for a long time with AIPAC and the ADL,
yeah.
But just the desperation, and then the Candace Owens getting booted from Daily Wire. It's
Ben Shapiro with his cap,
which I think she was doing a Kanye. She was just trying to get fired so she could get something new. And
that's what you gotta do. You put up with all that shit for no reason. So what can you do at that point?
But I think she's gonna. I could see her going with Tucker or somebody else, but
yeah, it's just weird where that comes from. Like it comes from all sides, and then it feels like it's contrived, planned, executed, and then usually these people are just left to, I don't know, make their next logical move. Unless you're Kanye West, and you just make any move, or the craziest move. Do we have you set up? We forgot to do that.
Let me see here.
You can do that, right? Because you'll be presenting us with a nice little story. I called this episode "D the Left."
Oh yeah,
take it as you will.
I was going to say that for the title, diagnosing the left. And I think this, and we could maybe do another show on the right, but I think. When I say the left, it's like the mainstream narrative, which is the left.
Yeah.
The mainstream of society, and I guess coming from a metropolitan area and being surrounded probably in both of our social circles with people who are. Oh, does that given a mirror effect? That's okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, baby. But basically, it's the guiding force of what's going on in our world is pretty much a left-wing perspective, in my opinion.
Taken to the extreme, is that, or like I'm asking because I don't know. Let's diagnose. I'm not a doctor. You're not a doctor.
No.
Let's diagnose this.
No, we're not experts, so
no, we're just casual observers. But I noticed, like, I talked to left-leaning friends of mine, and it seems like there's a lot of they don't like the classification, and rightfully so, of like liberal or taking offense to libtard, or if you say even like Democrats suck. That's basically or what I would mean by that generalized statement is something actually very specific, ironically, which would be that the Democrat politicians suck, or the party line, the party sucks, the people of the party suck. not if you're not the Democratic voter. And I think that's something that's overlooked.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to quantify exactly. Like, I think this applies to the individual as well as the people running the show and guiding people's thought process culturally, and it's sometimes hard to quantify. But I'm not trying to say like, oh yeah, this is how everyone is. But when you generalize, you have to kind of paint with a broader brush. So
Sure.
we're going to be doing that a little bit today with some themes. But when it comes,
I'd also add that if you're diagnosing, you're looking in the DSM, and that generally has disorders painted with a broad brush.
yeah, for sure. I mean, you have, especially with mental health diagnosis, it's
Yeah, like each individual case is different.
you pick up on patterns and then you put a label to it, but it's not exactly defines everybody the same way. But when it comes to modern society, or our, whether it's our peer group, maybe we can think about it that way, because I mean, I guess you're Gen X, right? Like,
careful, buddy.
ooh,
I'm Gen X cusp.
Yeah, you're like on the cusp.
Yeah,
and I'm kind of, I guess, in the mid to older range of millennials, so we're not too far apart.
No.
So our age group is fairly similar, but when it comes to how people, like, their guiding principles in life, and we both live in pretty blue left-wing areas, and I have a lot of friends who lean that way. What, like, from your perspective, what would you say that people's guiding principles are?
In my area, left-leaning guiding principles would be whatever their sense of justice is. That's interesting, because when I think about their guiding principles, it's a lot of things that I think are very common sense based, like care about the environment. Like, who doesn't care about the environment? Caring about animals. Like, you're kind of sick if you don't care about animals. Where I think it differentiates is I feel like everybody has the same principal values, and what distinguishes them is how you go about solving the problem. Um, Actually, I think on the left, I think one of their principles is to always have a problem to solve. Like, it can never just be chill,
Yeah, like they need conflict.
Yeah, or if there's no conflict, they need to advocate for some part of the world or some other culture that has conflict to kind of be like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm doing them justice. I'm probably not, but yeah, I would say like liberal, like freedom is a principle, freedom to do what you want with your life, freedom to choose who to love, freedom. But the how I've noticed it over a couple decades now is their sense of principles are always in opposition to the other side. Like, the other side is always trying to take it away from them. So there's just this. That's what I'm saying. Like, they always have a problem that needed to solve, because there's always got to be a struggle or a conflict.
Yeah, so they don't really, in a lot of ways, what you're sensing is that people define themselves by the opposition to the other side being against their position, which is kind of, I don't know if it's like, it's like a circular.
Yeah, I mean, on both sides, like growing up, it was
Worldview.
always like the left was trying to like take things away like guns and children, and you're just trying to take things away. And then I see it like almost flip flop now, where like the right or the MAGA or the extreme right are fascists trying to take away our freedoms, take away our rights. Um, just the other day, I was thinking like the my disdain for the left now has eclipsed my disdain for the right. Let's say 20 years ago, like right in the heat of the Iraq War, I was just like, oh my god, these Republican retards. And I don't know if that's just a change of power structure that happened after Bush years into the Obama years.
Yeah, I think I would agree, especially because they flipped on so many values and just the hypocrisy of it. I mean, it's almost it's like worn out how hypocritical they are with their beliefs when it comes to pro-choice and the vaccine and anti-war and then supporting Ukraine and
Yeah, the anti-vaxxers I ever knew, and the majority of them for a while were left wing.
right. Yeah, it came out of like Hollywood almost like or hippies and
yeah,
which is associated with the left.
same with homeschooling. The
Yeah.
big advocates for that were like left leaning for a really long time.
And censorship came from the conservative movement against rap music or like
Yeah, NWA. I
all
watched
that and
Straight Outta Compton.
hearings.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of flipped, but it probably flips back at some point. Kind of, I mean, the whole like we were saying with anti-Semitism, that's like I don't know if it's explicitly a right wing thing, but it comes out through that side where it's like the right wing cancel culture or cancer culture
Cancer
as
culture,
well.
yeah, you got it.
and,
Yeah.
and but for me, when it comes to guiding principles from that side, there isn't a lot, and I feel like at least consciously, I don't think for me a lot of the time it's almost as if they don't really have any, so they're just filled like that conflict that you're talking about fills that void. So it gets them animated, it gets them energized, like that other side is doing X, Y, and Z. And so
We gotta stop them.
with their guy, quote unquote, old Joe in office, they've kind of been flatlined. And with a lot of these things like the Ukraine war, but especially what's going on in Israel, their brains are so jambled, they're scrambled up that they are like I feel a sense of restlessness. Like
Well, that's not good.
they almost maybe they don't consciously feel this, but you can definitely sense it in the media where they almost want the orange man to come back in because then they have a purpose, like all those Antifa
Yeah.
types. Like, what are they doing now? Like nothing. Granted, they're mostly an op anyway, so the
Yeah.
op will be activated again when
Yeah,
necessary.
they're blocking the streets for climate change right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all they have is like climate change because it's like, oh, we're not doing enough, and so we got to throw oil paint on paintings. Okay, guys.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start with somebody who you introduced me to probably in like 2010. I don't even know how long ago it was, and it just took off. This guy took off during the pandemic. Yuri Bezmenov, and kind of just start us off with introducing the concept of demoralization and how I think most people in society, to some extent, on both sides of the aisle, are feeling a sense of demoralization. But specifically, he's talking about the left wing spectrum.
Ooh, we got volume issues here. That's not coming across. Do you got?
What'd you say?
It's not coming across. Like the volume is.
Oh, it's you can't hear
nice
it.
setup too. Yeah.
Oh no.
No.
Well, that's fun.
Is that something with your?
I thought am I not sharing audio? Oh. See, this is what happens when we
Step away for so long.
step away. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I did also share tab audio. Let's see. Entire screen. Also share it. There we go. Okay.
Hey.
So Yuri Bezmenov, I'm gonna roll that clip back a little bit.
Yeah.
You shared this man with me, and he went viral during the pandemic because he kind of hit the nail on the head here.
This they don't understand, and it will be greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically, America is stuck with demoralization. And unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism.
Oh yeah. 15, 20 years.
So your child, our children, when they become adults, that amount of deprogramming will be required according to him. But I do think what an interesting thing that he talks about in that clip is that no matter what you say, what facts you show to somebody who's demoralized about, let's just take the jab, for instance. Hey, have you looked at the VAERS database? Have you looked at all these reports of people who have had illnesses or died and it's like the glazed look takes over and they have nothing to say. It doesn't matter. And no, I only listen to what the man on the TV tells me, and I can't see outside of that.
Yeah. Or even taking what sorry, the orange man says, which whatever they hear on the media, and then actually showing them the context of the clip, like the full clip. They won't even. You can show them what he said in full, and they won't even factor into their opinion.
Yep.
Yeah. And this was in 1984 that he's saying that. So that's what, 30 years ago?
40.
40. Yeah, 40 years ago.
Yeah, so he called this out, I mean, he probably sensed it long before this was recorded as well, but I mean, demoralized people generally, I think there's also an element of nihilism, which they don't know what they believe. They don't know why they believe it. they also in postmodern society, there's no commitment to any type of objective truth. Words, as we've seen with, things like the word woman, don't really have objective meaning. You can change on the dime. Oh, the science changed, or that's not, or just lie, but it just allows a lot of ambiguity and slippery, like, language and things that are very hard to narrow down and say, hey, you're kind of like, don't you see that you're not really being consistent or logical? And or like, do you understand what's guiding you here? Because if you don't, then you don't have a solid foundation to stand on when it comes to your beliefs and all these different aspects. Like, I think if you're demoralized, you're just in a position of basically waiting to be told what to do and what to believe, because you yourself don't consciously know what that is, or you're opposed to having any kind of beliefs or set vision of what the world is. And nihilism, I think, for me, is one of the biggest problems that I see in modern society that guides a lot of people I know, whether they're conscious of it or not. That comes in a lot of different avenues. But just kind of like the fuck it mindset, like nothing matters. And not and you're not really accountable to anything when you're nihilistic, because what does it mean? What does being accountable even mean? What is
literally it's the belief that life is meaningless.
Yeah.
So nothing will mean anything to
exactly
once you've hit the nihilist threshold.
And this clip from Academy of Ideas kind of sums up the different types of nihilism and how it relates to our society.
Moral nihilism denies the sense of moral obligation, the objectivity of moral principles, or the moral viewpoint. Epistemological nihilism denies that there can be anything like truths or meanings not strictly confined within, or wholly relative to, a single individual, group, or conceptual scheme. Cosmic nihilism disavows intelligibility or value in nature, seeing it as indifferent or hostile to fundamental human concerns. Existential nihilism negates the meaning of life. Based on this passage, one can see that the first three types of nihilism, moral...
Hold on, can you roll that back a little bit? Just back to the slide, at least. There's something in there. So the cosmic nihilism disavows intelligibility or value in nature. Yet, maybe the same people... I don't know. I've never met a full-blown nihilist or somebody that classifies themselves as it. And I understand maybe that we're talking about people that act in such a way, but if they see nature as indifferent or hostile to fundamental human concerns, oh, the planet's trying to kill us, or these viruses are trying to kill us, but yet they fight so hard to save it in its natural form.
Yeah, as in, like, we're going to do whatever it takes to save human life from this virus that is destroying our world.
Yeah, or even just save our Mother Earth from humans. Like, it'll flip from nature being uncaring towards us to us being uncaring towards nature. Like,
yeah, I know what you're saying. I think, in my perspective, that's in large part because, well, nihilism kind of allows a lot of paradoxical thinking, because what does meaning mean? A doesn't mean A, so A could mean B at the same time.
Well, also, if there's no truth, then anything can be a paradox.
But I think nihilism is like the coping mechanism for the fact that they're the unexamined life. They haven't really thought through these things and broken down the logical inconsistencies, or maybe it's just a way of denying the fact that, oh yeah, there's a lot of serious things going on in the world. But then it reminds me of that saying, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. So nihilists, because they have that void of foundational principles, it can be filled in very easily by these propaganda terms like slow the spread. We got to, lock down for whatever. So I think nihilists are very susceptible to becoming agents of whatever narrative is being spun for whoever's purpose.
Yeah, like foot soldiers.
Yeah.
And Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, I mean they're the NPC foot soldiers because the programming, the only programming they operate on is maybe not totally, but a lot of it is like, meaning isn't. There is no meaning, so somebody comes along and can give them something very surface level, very emotion based. It's not based in very thought through ideas or concepts. It's just guttural, like, because when you're reacting emotionally, you're not really thinking through like, hey, wait a second, this isn't logical. So I feel also that nihilism allows people to be very reactive emotionally because they don't have like the cognitive side of them is almost self-destructive. It's not really set in any structured way around something that they can fall back on. And I've met and talked to people who identify with nihilism, and it can be very frustrating to have a serious discussion with them because they can change on a dime and literally contradict themselves. Not even maybe even be aware of it. It's crazy to witness. But it's almost like talking to a politician about, hey, you lied. Like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What's the definition of is? Was that what Bill Clinton said back in the day?
Yeah, it depends on what the definition of is.
Yeah.
Which is an insane statement.
It's very weaselly.
Yeah.
And another aspect, and I don't have to play that whole clip out, of nihilism, which I think is linked to COVID, is scientism, which I didn't make this connection other than thinking like, well, yeah, it is interesting to observe that a lot of people I know who wholly trust the science and are also happen to be kind of nihilistic, like what the linkage is there, and he kind of describes it pretty well here.
Okay.
If one looks back to the beginning of the scientific revolution, it is obvious that science and nihilism go hand in hand. This idea is captured by a quote from the modern Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg, who stated that the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it seems pointless. Nietzsche, in his book The Gay Science, reiterates the idea that science and the meaninglessness of life go hand in hand. He wrote, "A scientific interpretation of the world, as you understand, might therefore still be one of the most stupid of all possible interpretations of the world, meaning that it would be one of the poorest in meaning. This thought is intended for the ears and consciences of our mechanists who nowadays like to pass as philosophers and insist that mechanics is the doctrine of the first and last laws on which all existence must be based as on the ground floor. But an essentially mechanical world would be an essentially meaningless world. Assuming that one estimated the value of a piece of music according to how much of it could be counted, calculated, and expressed in formulas, how absurd would such a scientific estimation of music be? What would one have comprehended, understood, grasped of it? Nothing, really nothing of what is music in it."
So the linkage of scientism and nihilism is that it becomes almost just like a very mechanistic worldview that, where how he's using the example of music. You can't just quantify music based on math alone. Like it it encompasses a lot of different aspects of human experience, or how you perceive it, how it makes you feel. Like there's so many different layers to it, and that's the same with reality. And if you try to break it down to some base level where you can just put it into a math equation and say, see, now we understand the world, it kind of loses a lot of deeper meaning, because you're just trying to explain it in that way, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
And
it loses meaning when you try to elaborate on the meaning, whereas the music is an experiential activity. Like if you hear a song that you love, you're loving it while you're listening to it simultaneously.
right.
Afterwards, if you try to explain that, you kind of lose that essential feeling that you had when you were listening to it. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some people that try to, and if you try to I mean, it's a skill to try to explain why you felt something was good, or the reasons why, whatever song or film or piece of art was that really captivated you. And I mean, that's the skill of being a good writer or communicator in that way. But purely doing it from a quote unquote scientific interpretation, you would end up sounding like a robot, because you're just trying to break it down into its base parts and quantify it in a way that doesn't encapsulate the whole thing. And science, it's very useful in creating formulas, or when you're talking like chemistry or all different types of science. It's useful, but as a guiding philosophy, it's not useful at all, because science doesn't tell you what's right or wrong, or what's meaningful. It can help to bring that out a little bit more in terms of some facts and mathematical realities about things, but in and of itself, it's limited. And people that fall into like, science is my religion, whether they consciously think that or not,
Yeah.
I think falling into a trap where, okay, yeah, so you're basically defining reality by a system that is stripping it of a lot of its human qualities, or not just human qualities, but things that it's not just like something that you can create a formula for and say this is the truth.
Right. Science requires analysis, which is maybe why it's related. The scientism is related to religion, because I think the big conception of religious folk is that they don't think for themselves, they don't analyze, which I think is very not true. If you talk to people who actually study and read the Bible, there's continuous analysis going. But yeah, science requires that analysis to put together into a rhetorical package. All that data, all the hypothesis you have to consider.
Yeah, and I think science is a replacement for religion for some people, because there's a lot of uncertainty and unanswered questions in our
And that's
world.
what the experts are for.
Yeah.
You know,
And science helps us to answer those questions, but some of those questions can't be answered by a formula,
or an expert. I mean, experts just, the modern day priest, like the lazy religious person who just defers to the priest for every opinion in life, decision, or counsel. So now we can just, like, if we're wanting, I go back to the principles of the left. Maybe idealism is one of those principles, like striving for the ideal society or community. There's always the sense that something could be better, and that's probably where there's always got to be a conflict coming, because something can always be improved upon, which I don't think is I don't think it's a ignoble thing. I like it. I'm an idealist. Nothing's perfect, but that sense that you realize that everything could be better, and then instead of actually going through that analysis yourself, you can defer to an expert to kind of just keep you afloat in your search for a better world.
Yeah, and I guess you could kind of break that down between, like, the differences between a conservative or a progressive, where progressive is looking at the things that are wrong and how can we improve upon them. And you can see obviously a positive side to that.
Yeah.
And conservatives are looking at what's right and how they want to preserve or conserve that. And there's obviously a good thing about that as well. There's good and bad in those things. And you can see on both ends how those belief systems or philosophies could be hijacked. I think with the progressive, if you don't have those foundational principles, if you're nihilistic, or you don't say, yeah, I'm going to uphold, let's say, the idea of bodily autonomy in all its forms, whatever you want to define that, but like at least trying to have a semblance of logical, whatever logic
consistency, I would say.
Consistency, yeah. But if you don't
subscribe to a bodily autonomy, to avoid being a hypocrite or becoming hypocritical, you have to uphold that view on all threats to bodily autonomy.
Right.
You can't pick and choose.
I can see if you don't have a very clear-cut vision or principle of the world or what you believe, or you believe in nothing, like I said earlier, that can be hijacked, and it can be somebody can easily come along and say, hey, we're going to do this right now, and this is what we need to do for the collective good or for progress or whatever. And it can go completely in opposition to maybe something that you believed previously. But if you don't have something to stand on, like a foundation is what your house is built on, and it's what if you're talking about principles, it's what's going to stay there regardless of what happens. You can change a room in your house, but you're not going to change your foundation usually.
Right.
So if you
want to add to your house, you have a solid foundation to then put an addition on.
Yeah, you still have to put a foundation that's going to stay there regardless. You can change other things about it, but that's solid, that's immovable. But if you don't have that, then you're at the behest of the current thing. And we've seen that with so many different things in recent years, where current thingism comes up and it's like, oh yeah, this completely contradicted whatever. But if you don't have a foundation, which nihilism to me strips away foundational beliefs, because it's a nothingness. It's embracing the void without any kind of idea of anything meaning anything. So anything can mean anything. Therefore, war can be peace. I mean, Orwell would probably, I don't know what Orwell said about nihilism, but I'm sure he would probably say that it does allow for, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I could see him understanding this perspective in terms of, from a postmodern world where words can be whatever you want. That's newspeak in 1984. That's
yeah.
Nothing means nothing, so we can say whatever we want means anything.
Right. And if you take offense to it, it can just be nothing. Or if it's threatening, it could be nothing.
Yep.
You can just pass it off as nothing. Interestingly, Ivan Turgenev, a Russian novelist, short story writer, poet, playwright, translator, and popularizer of Russian. I'm reading from Wikipedia. Popularizer of Russian literature in the West, was a big advocate for nihilism. He kind of popularized that.
Huh.
And I think around 1874. So it's interesting of what types of things were brewing around that time of history.
Well, when was the Communist Manifesto read?
It's the 30s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, something maybe
that long ago, huh?
I don't know. Communist Manifesto. So this was 1848.
Okay.
So nihilism came on the writing scene about 30 years later. Interesting. Anyway.
Well, and I would say one thing about Yuri Bezmenov that I always think is limited is that he focuses on the Soviet infiltration of America and all that. And not to say that wasn't going on, but he kind of overlooks the influence of the Frankfurt School. I don't think he ever really touched on that. And that's basically like what we would consider the critical theorists. Marcuse was part of that. The cultural Marxism, essentially, if we're going to use that.
Yeah, kind of like intellectualism mixed with the occult, I feel, or that new age era of like Blavatsky and God, what was the Aleister Crowley? I mean, they were all hanging around with those Frankfurt School.
Oh, interesting.
I feel like they were.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
But I mean, going to Crowley, what was his law?
Do what you will.
Do what thou will, that is the whole of the law.
Yeah.
It's like that kind of is a nihilistic statement. Like, yeah, do whatever you want. It
doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything.
And with the Frankfurt School, what we see with critical race theory or critical gender theory or queer theory, all these different things, it's in a lot of ways it takes the meanings of words and inverts them, or like, oh, maybe it doesn't mean that, or no, we're not saying this. And it's a lot of confusion. Society becomes confused because it is just all these intellectual like conversations that are above most people's heads, but it kind of sounds true. Kind of sounds like there's some validity there. It allows for a lot of bad ideas to sneak their way in, and a lot of people have fallen for them because maybe they haven't figured out what their defining philosophy is, or they've shunned religion. They've, whatever the dominant philosophy of America was, they've reacted to that negatively. And so it's like, well, they're primed to fill it in with ideas that may not be the best.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. I think nihilism is a huge. If I'm trying to put it into a few different categories or diagnose what's going on, nihilism is one of the pillars of how a lot of our society is operating from. Another one is hedonism, and I wanted to just play this brief definition of what hedonism is.
Hedonism. Hedonism is the belief that pleasure, or the absence of pain, is the most important principle in determining the morality of a potential course of action. Pleasure can be things like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But it can also include any intrinsically valuable experience, like reading a good book. Hedonism is a type of consequentialism, and it has several forms.
I like how they just made it
For example-
real innocent. Like, it's just like reading a book.
Right. No, it's a good thing because it makes you feel good.
Yeah. We're all hedonists, basically.
Normative hedonism is the idea that pleasure should be people's primary motivation. On the other hand, motivational hedonism says that only pleasure and pain cause people to do what they do. Egotistical hedonism requires a person to consider only his or her own pleasure in making choices. Conversely, altruistic hedonism says that the creation of pleasure for all people is the best way to measure if an action is ethical.
Pizza.
Regardless of the type of hedonism, critics fault it as a guide for morality because hedonism ignores all other values, such as freedom or fairness, when evaluating right and wrong.
School of Business. Wow. Okay.
Right. McCombs, that's a good way to advertise. Talk about hedonism. But for me, we see this, and I think we're all guilty of a level of hedonism. Like we seek out pleasure because it, inherently it feels good, right?
Yeah. Where do you think that comes from early on as a child?
That's a good question.
Oh, I would say sugar.
Oh.
I would say sugar. One of your first. And television, probably.
Sugar and television. Yeah, those are the two.
Yeah. Put a kid in front of TV, they could sit there for hours.
Oh, I know. I remember.
Yeah.
All that wasted Saturday afternoons when I was growing up.
Yeah.
But it, in a certain degree, hedonism, it makes sense. Like, you're not, and you could really get into
we're not pure
layers of it. Like, oh, well, you want to have a good life. You want to be healthy. You want to have a happy family that's cares about each other, and you want to be able to enjoy certain aspects of, you don't want to always be working 24 hours a day. Like, you want to have certain time to enjoy life,
Yeah.
But as the deterministic philosophy of, like, the guiding principle of your life, hedonism, if you're conscious of it or not, if that's what's guiding your life alone, it's very there's a lot of problems with that.
Yeah. Please tell me you're not taking this down the road of pedophilia.
I'm not, don't worry.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, that's for those people, those like, I don't even want to use the map even as a joke, because that's just such a bastardization of what's going on. But
yeah,
like, to just say, oh, what feels good to me, which, what feels good to somebody who's like that, very different from your well-adjusted person in and of itself. It's going to allow for some bad shit to happen. But without the extreme levels of it just allows you to be guided like a mouse or a rat through a little maze to get the cheese at the end. And who knows, what the trap is with the cheese, how they set you up to move through this, just because you wanted to get that little reward at the end.
Yeah.
And I've seen this. I think the reason this is relevant to me in the last few years, especially with COVID, was when the vaccine passports were implemented for our age group. And I witnessed this because I was I was involved pretty heavily in the music scene. When they instituted the passport for concerts, a lot of people were like, I got to do it. because
travel.
Yeah, or travel, which is that's another aspect of like vacation, see new
Yeah,
sights.
that's like reading a book kind of hedonism. It's innocent, but it's it's sophisticated hedonism. Traveling, being well traveled, which I understand. I love to travel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love concerts. I mean, I love
Yeah.
music. But if you are the trap of what I saw, obviously, with just letting hedonism be your defining principle or philosophy, is that you are very susceptible to somebody coming in and saying, "Hey, take this," or you can't have that pleasure.
Right.
Like if the pleasure of the show or the travel or whatever it is your your height, that's your motivation, then they got you.
It's unsophisticated. You tell a child that get your clothes on, like outside clothes. I'll just use my son for example. Oh no, I don't want to. I don't want to. Won't do it. Won't do it. Okay, well if you don't, then you cannot watch TV. Okay, I'll put him on. I'll put him on. It's just the same thing. Like I hate that. I hate to disrespect people in that way, but it's so childlike.
It very much is.
Even even in myself, I can see that being like, okay, you're gonna take this thing away from me. Okay, I'll do what I need to do.
Yeah, and I think that's a reflection of how the elites view society in a lot of ways.
It's children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, for all the people that went along with it just to go to that concert they were wanting to go to, like, you didn't really prove them wrong.
Right.
This is your time to put your big girl, big boy pants on and say, no, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to do that just to go to a concert. That's dumb.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, unfortunately, it was very, very disappointing to witness that in so many ways.
Yeah, if you're involved in it as much as you were. I mean, you weren't just like involved in the scene. You were looking to be actively, a part of in terms of promotion. No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was, and I was potentially trying to do it full time as a business.
Yeah.
Prior to, I mean, the lockdowns really changed that trajectory, and then the passport just pretty much killed most of my desire to do it in any big capacity.
It soured your passion.
Yeah, very much so. And it's one of those things. And I remember years ago, prior to maybe even coming to a lot of the conspiracy minded worldview or whatever you want, like truth movement stuff. I remember going to music festivals and just looking around, seeing all the young people there, the communal aspect of it, the shared joy or experience that we had, and thinking to myself, like, oh, this is our generation's version of church.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, now looking back on it, it's like, yeah, and don't we see that there's a problem with that? That's your just a music setting, a festival or a concert. It's not the same thing.
No, not at all.
And clear, there's issues with church too, and it depending on the church or whatever. But like, it's not. It's. I'm sure some churches require the jab too.
Oh, that'd be interesting,
right? Yeah. But it made, in reflecting on that and with the passport, it really made me see music and live shows and also restaurants. Those were the two things. Restaurants and concerts were the big carrot or the cheese at the end of the maze to put us down to say, oh, I wasn't really thinking I was going to get it, but now I'll go get it.
Well, also livelihood, man, they came after.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. That was the less voluntary. Like if you were lucky enough, let's just say, like,
You're talking extracurriculars.
Yeah, I'm saying like it's still your choice kind of thing.
Mhm.
And this is going to change your life and your ability to do the things that you enjoy. Getting back to like the hedonism part, because the mandate's totally separate, like level of it. But it really made me think like, oh, these I'm not trying to like go down the road of some like extremely conservative viewpoint where it's like, yeah, these concerts and whatever, it's like it's a trap. But you really like the devil's playground or whatever you want to say. But it kind of was exposed as like, this really feels like you guys were setting this up, or maybe just hijacking it really to use it as a way to just manipulate people to do what they want, because if they don't have foundational principles, they can't think outside of, oh man, if I don't go to that show or be able to go to that restaurant, like what does my life mean? Because I live for the shows. I live to enjoy food and, like you're saying, travel. Those are like
post about it online.
Yeah, and Instagram. Like I literally won't be existing if I'm not able to post my story and take in that new sight or sound. And that really exposed how hedonistic worldview is. Huge Achilles heel.
And they really pushed the concept of normal, getting back to normal, and such an event. Like, I don't know about you, but it seemed pretty obviously things weren't ever going back to normal. Like, it was such a trauma that, like, or the new normal.
The new normal, yeah.
Yeah.
Getting back to nihilistic terms, that what?
Or hedonistic, even like the normal, getting back to normal with our hedonism, as far as like the hedonism light of like going to a restaurant, going to a show, traveling. Yeah, I think that they really encompassed a great amount of people with those three things. I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you live to feel good and you don't have a sense of community, which a lot of people don't, they've shunned religion. They don't go to like any kind of community groups outside of, I meet with my friends, we go to shows, we go to restaurants.
Yeah.
We go to bars.
Well, I don't know if these are goggles that I need to put on, but going back to our definition of demoralization, a persistent, this is an abstract National Institute of Health, demoralization as described by Jerome Frank is experienced as a persistent inability to cope together with associated feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, meaninglessness, subjective incompetence. And there you have your subjective incompetence to prevent, let's just say in the case of COVID, to prevent, your incompetence to do anything about it, and diminish self-esteem. So the self-esteem issue is there, I think, especially if you're deriving your meaning in life from hanging out with other people, going to shows or restaurants, or looking towards the external to provide you with control and I guess competence. Competence as an adult. Like, look at this. I have a job. I pay for all these things. I'm competent. I pay for my lifestyle. It's where I derive meaning.
Yeah, and if you just see yourself through the lens of those activities and being able to be there, we hear the concept of FOMO a lot, like fear of missing out, like that was eliminated if you or that's going to be your existence. If that's what you were living your life around, is like being there and being in the midst of everything that's happening, like not taking the jab for a good period of time, like you better embrace, like, or just don't have a fear of missing out, because you're missing out of the thing that you want to be missing out of, that jab.
Yeah, and why would you want to miss out on that? I would think like health reasons, longevity.
Yeah, philosophically, even if it's, let's just say it is fine for your health, but you don't feel comfortable with, like, I don't feel like I need this, and I don't think it's, even if it was safe, which it obviously isn't for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's some level of like, I don't feel I need this, and I'm not going to let somebody else tell me that I need it because, the show is providing it or whatever. Like, if you have that principle in your head that, like, no, I'm not going to just let people bully me into getting it because they're treating me like a child, like you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
Then you would, as somebody who has, or if you're thinking about it, demoralized, what don't they have? Morals. Those have been taken away. You're demoralized. Like,
right.
You don't have morality.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have, it's almost, you could use deprincipled as well. Or
that's interesting, because I always thought of demoralization as like, and it is in a way a sense of like beating down, but I never considered it of being a lack or absence of morals.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of just came to me now, but like also just a lack of what that definition you just read, like self-esteem.
Yeah, self-esteem. Yeah,
it's just a lack of feeling, like a lack of purpose, a lack of morals, and that's it. And it goes. That's why it goes hand in hand with nihilism to me. Is like, well, if you don't have any of those things, then instead of like, oh man, maybe I should really re-examine what I believe. No, nothing matters. Nothing meaning. Yeah, dude, meaning's bullshit. That's just kind of either a coward's way or just a lazy way out.
It's a demoralized person's way. Yeah. I feel like the next step, or the easy step from demoralization, is nihilism. It's easier to step into nihilism than it is to step into like high self-worth, meaningfulness, hopefulness. It's a much shorter step to nihilism, because then you can rationalize your behaviors by giving them no meaning, or the consequences of no meaning.
Yeah, and then you're surrounded by people who are also demoralized, and so then that's the norm, is to be demoralized, nihilistic, and all of these things. And then, those are your peers, and so, well, I mean, if that's, like, it becomes very unconscious. Like, obviously, we like to think about these things. Like, we like to analyze what we believe, what other people believe. That's not a huge interest for a lot of people. And unfortunately, when the school of fish is swimming into the void and no one knows what it is, why they're there, you just follow the trend. And unfortunately, that's, a lot of people just get caught up in it. And
because what does it matter?
Yeah,
in the grand scheme of things.
But it does matter.
It does. I agree.
And I'm gonna bring in Jordan Peterson.
Make your bed, man. Okay.
Yeah. But he talks about the dangers of hedonistic lifestyle, at least when it comes to, like a very short-term mindset of it.
Do your best for the best. You might say, well, that's just to make me hedonically happy. It's like, well, wait a second, cocaine will work for that, because it actually even activates this system. But what about tomorrow and next week and next month? And so the problem with hedonism as a goal is, first of all, it vanishes when you're suffering. But even Failing that, if you're serving yourself hedonically in the narrow sense, it's just about me and my pleasure. It's like, okay, which you? Today's you, tomorrow's you, next week's you, next month's you. What about next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You're going to lead a hedonic and dissolute life, and what are you going to be, a burnt out shell and a wreck, a dismal wreck in 10 years? Because that's what happened. And so if you don't construe yourself as a community stretched out across time, then you're not even serving yourself. And if you do construe yourself as a community stretched across time, then serving other people and serving yourself turn out to be exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with it. It's just so hard to take that stretched out perspective.
Oh yeah,
and maintain it,
especially in our modern life where TikTok and Instagram rule the day.
Yeah, yeah, like you just reset the next day. Do your thing during the day. No matter how it turns out, reset. Tomorrow's a new day. Mm-hmm. I'm guilty of that all the time.
Sure, we all are.
Yeah.
But in principle, and kind of getting back to the COVID discussion with hedonism and what we were talking about with, going to shows, like if you think about the short-term pleasure, I mean, even for me, it's like, well, the short-term pain of taking that thing doesn't seem worth it. But let's just say you just have a little sniffles or whatever, feel bad for a day or two, and then you can go to shows like, oh yeah, you're doing it for that short-term gain. A lot of the worst parts of hedonism is very it's very short-term minded, I guess. And I don't know how many hedonists or people that are guided by that are thinking long term.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
It kind of seems a little antithetical to that, because for me, I view hedonism as being something that is, you're just doing it for that short-term feeling of pleasure. Now you can go down those other roads and say, oh, well, it's for this or that. But like in general, in modern society, that's how I see it.
Yeah, very reminiscent of the 80s, I feel, especially like glam rock. Like people watch those rock stars just live the hedonistic lifestyle. And man, not even with like admiration or anything, but being like, man, they're not going to last long. That there was a sense of that. I don't know why. I don't know if it was just the internet or the zeitgeist of the time. I don't know. For some reason, I thought of the 80s being very hedonistic and not thinking long term. But yet people generally felt like had a more long term grasp. And maybe that's a generational thing.
Yeah,
the consequences of your actions, Yeah. Just as a thought, maybe that's being on the cusp of the Gen X, just seeing a lot of the boomer stuff. Rejecting like their parents' generation of like long-term planning, long-term spending. The Depression era where it's like, we got to make this bag of rice like last like a few months, like how are we going to do it? Like that, those hardships just kind of instilled long-term thinking in people by necessity and survival. And as we've progressed in Pip's quotes, we've become more hedonistic and therefore less long-term planning, long-term thinking, like as a society.
Yeah, and I think there's a level of, as things have progressed with technology or our ability to feed ourselves or have things instantly with the internet.
Or fast food.
Yeah, exactly. it's kind of removed that sense of like having to plan long term because, well, you can get it now. Oh, don't think too much about, like whatever it is in the future. Just, yeah, you can get it now. And that's hedonistic lifestyle is very much to me like it's like the flip side of the Buddhist idea of being present, where you're living in the moment, and that's viewed as a positive thing. But if you view it from a hedonistic perspective, just living for the moment and not thinking and living for the pleasure in the moment specifically, like that's just going to allow you to ignore all the other aspects that you could be negatively impacted by. Oh, I'm only going to go for the junk food and watch TV.
Yeah, you seek out more pleasure for those moments.
Yeah, learning a skill or going for a walk or working out and building your muscle, like like the 600-pound life person is like the epitome of the worst excesses of hedonism to me.
Yeah, especially when they're rolling around on motorized wheels.
Yeah. And hedonism, I think hedonism and nihilism are very influential, but another thing came up that I've been thinking about recently, and this is again coming more from the left wing side of the country, is when it comes to things specifically with the issue of the border, because that's a very very relevant issue that some of us can see in our lives. Where I'm from, it's become a very big issue, and I think in the country as a whole, but not just the U.S. Every other Western country is dealing with crazy levels of migration. It's affecting different things, and one of the problems that you see, and this is not just in migration; it's in other issues. But I'm just using this as the example, is that what'll happen in conversation is the issue of, well, you want to be compassionate towards these people and you want to have empathy for these people, and whether it's the migrants or whether it's the people using drugs in the street or homeless people or maybe people who are poor and committing crime, whatever it is, if you start from the position of like empathy and compassion, which are valuable traits, but an excessive level of them can allow for a lot of chaos and a lot of social decay. And
yeah, I mean, your compassion and empathy is it's not going to help them. And B, if that's your base coming from, I don't know. I used to be more compassionate, focused on stuff like this, but I guess, and maybe it's just me, but it never seemed to, like, I feel like looking back, and I'm talking in like when I'm in my 20s, like it never allowed me to like constructively analyze a situation. So like in the Iraq war, it was all about compassion of like against bombing, quote unquote innocent people, but were they all innocent? I mean, what, like, I don't want to sound crude, but like there's an issue there. And like I'm ignoring all the other like esoteric reasons why we're there. I'm just straight like bombing, like only thinking about the people. It doesn't help to stop it. It doesn't help to take away their pain, or that it doesn't help change their situation. Like what does it really do? Like what does compassion and empathy really do other than self-serve? Is that another form of hedonism?
Huh?
To be empathetic towards everybody? Does it give you pleasure to be empathetic? I mean, it can't, right? I mean, a lot of like pain felt is through empathy, pain of others.
That is, yeah. It can be very self-serving in that way.
Yeah, and I'm thinking maybe it was just me because it never opened me up to any sort of like analysis of the facts. And I could always ignore any facts because I was riding on my compassion. Like I could always justify it. Well, I'm being compassionate. That's a positive thing.
Yeah, and if you're only thinking from a place of compassion or empathy, which have their benefits, but if that's how you want to be perceived by others, and I think a lot of the time people are, I'm not trying to take away from people's motivations, but there's probably an element of, I want to be seen as a good person. It's the person that has the "we believe" sign out front. Like, that's me announcing that no human being is illegal. Science is real. All these different things. Sometimes when your desire to be perceived as a good person, as a kind person, as someone who's caring, open-minded, whatever, and that is your, let's say, if that's your principle above anything else, it's out of whack, because that's not the only thing that's going to solve the problem. Like if somebody is robbing a store, your first reaction probably shouldn't be compassion. Maybe for the person being robbed, but for the person doing the robbing, compassion can come down the road once
later, yeah.
Once the Maslow's hierarchy of needs has been solved and we're safe. Maybe that person is locked up for a bit so that we can discuss why did you do this, and like let's actually try to have some empathy. But especially if somebody's violent, or if there's a situation where there's a lot of people coming into an area and the community can't handle that much people, and there's maybe a way of stopping that, then compassion, if you're only having compassion for those people who are, well, they don't, they're fleeing their country or whatever. Well, do you have compassion for the people who are living in that town, who now have a huge social problem on their hands? Like during BLM, a lot of people had compassion and empathy for the people who were abused by police, but then they had no compassion or empathy for the businesses that were destroyed during the protests for those people.
Yeah, but those are all armchair emotions at that point.
Yeah,
because everybody was watching that on their television or social media.
For the most,
they didn't have to be in it,
Yeah. Well, it all was armchair emotions, right? Like the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Although, I mean, I could walk downtown and I wasn't personally affected by my business or anything like that. But like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is armchair. Like, I want to feel for that person. But when it actually comes to, oh, this is going to impact, like, your quality of life you're going to have to sacrifice a lot. If you want to keep, people want to be perceived as compassionate, but they don't want to actually pay for any of the consequences of that.
Well, it goes back to that sign in the front yard, like perception. What do they want to be perceived as? Do they want to be perceived as kind and caring to their neighbors, or do they want to be not perceived as a member of the other side according to their perception?
Yeah, I think that probably motivates it as much as the in favor of the thing.
Yeah, which is messed up.
It is messed
Because
up.
that's not even like you don't even you're operating off of your perception of the quote unquote other side, which you don't even have. You don't want to be like them so hard that you don't associate with them, so you don't actually even know how they really are.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
I mean, I had a neighbor with that sign who pretty much immediately wanted to call the cops on somebody that we knew was coming over here just because they knocked on the wrong door or like had their car parked in a certain way. I was like,
That's not very compassionate.
no human being's illegal except parking wrong in front of my house, bitch.
Wow. Yeah, and that contradiction so stark like
Yeah.
that is really, really reprehensible.
Yeah, it's just that surface level belief. Like, I want to wave this flag, but when it actually comes to the day-to-day stuff about whatever like, you can say you believe these things, but when it comes to like, okay, well, here's the consequence of this thing. Like, do you actually want that? Oh yeah, because it's impacting your life, other people's lives in a way that's not beneficial.
Less hedonistic, let's say.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I guess, like you were saying, the compassion hedonism overlap or empathy overlap there is that you're just thinking like, oh, that's so what about they're struggling, they have a really hard time where they're coming from, like,
Yeah, again, it's a perception issue.
yeah. And then you keep having that only first, oh, but they're really having a hard time. And you just keep doing that a few million times a year. And then before you know it, you're dealing with, oh, the long-term ramifications of like, oh, gee, how has this impacted everyone's quality of life and wages and housing and resources and all this? Like, well, if you weren't so focused on that feeling of, oh, but yeah, and what you're saying earlier, compassion, that just feeling that is like there's some pleasure that they're getting from that to some extent. Because it's like, oh, it's reminding me that I'm a good person, you know?
Yeah, at the end of the day, you can skate off with your compassionate skates.
But I want to play this clip. Jordan Peterson kind of talks about this a little bit more in depth.
Can you turn it up a little bit? Same deal.
Now, compassion is great for dealing with infants, and maybe it's great for dealing with hurt people and really elderly people. You know, it's good for taking care of people who can't take care of themselves, but it's not a great doctrine to be building a political system on. And so one of the things that happens with the more politically correct types by temperament is that they suffer from an excess of impulsive compassion. And they assume that if there's an inequitable distribution of anything, that the people who are at the bottom are all victims who should be treated like infants, and that everyone at the top is a vicious snake-like predator. And that's hardwired in some sense. Now, it's a very popular story. Yeah, of course. Of course, it's an easy story to sell, and there's some truth in it, but some truth isn't the same as all the truth. And so what you see, at least in part, is undifferentiated empathy, and that's not a virtue. It's not a virtue. You have to think. You can't just feel. You have to think. You know, even when you're taking care of kids, part of what you're doing is being compassionate. But if you're too compassionate towards your kids, then you do everything for them. And if you do everything for them, then they grow up useless and they never leave, and they hate you, and they hate everything else too. It's a bad idea. And so you use compassion judiciously. You know, there's a rule if you're working in a place like a nursing home, and the rule is, it's a harsh rule, do not do anything for the people that you're taking care of that they can do for themselves. And so if they have to struggle to feed themselves, you don't bloody well intervene and feed them. You let them maintain their damn independence. And you have to be a hard-hearted bastard to do that, you know, to watch someone struggle like that. But you're furthering their medium to long-term independence and development. And you do the same thing with your children, treating your children like they're endless permanent victims is a very bad idea. And I think that's part of what's also being taught. We also know that the kids who are more likely to be rabidly politically correct, one of the reasons that they're more likely to be that way is because they were taught to be that way. We found that even exposure to a single lecture that was associated with the politically correct dogmatic structure was enough to tilt people in that direction.
Wow.
So there's a temperamental proclivity, and then there's failure of education to address that, and then there's the exacerbation and exaggeration by the people who are trying to produce like activists by proxy.
So something he said in there is you can't just feel, you have to think.
Right.
So you can't just have the feeling of, oh, well, look at what they're dealing with and all that. And you have to think. Thinking requires a little bit bigger perspective about, or it should anyway, that what is the ramifications of letting in all these people when it comes to the migration issue? How is it going to impact our budgets, our house, all the different things we mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, instead of just saying how I feel, like you can't just, you can't live a life based purely on feelings, because then you're just going to be reacting to everything. And I do think a lot of people are in emotional reaction mode. We saw this during COVID. We saw it with Ukraine. We see it with, to some degree, the Israel conflict on both sides. Not to make a judgment on that, but
yeah,
when you're just in emotional reaction mode and you're not really thinking through, like, removing your feelings for a second, then you're at the behest of whatever is on TV or the media that makes you feel a certain way, and then you'll just do whatever it is they want you to do.
Yeah, for sure. Now you got me thinking that these compassionate, empathetic feelers are just surface level, because like I feel like compassion and empathy takes thought, like to truly be compassionate. Like he's saying, like the struggling person eating, like your impulse. Did he call it impulsive compassion? I don't know. But your impulse is to help them.
Yeah.
But you have to, you're compassionate not just for their struggle, but for what their struggle means. So, or what it might mean for you to intervene in their struggle. Like that person has to feed themselves. All the thoughts that come through, that you might be taking away their dignity by helping them. You might be retarding their development by helping them in the case of a child.
Yep.
So these all require thought and not just impulsive compassion.
Well, he said you have to be judicious with your compassion, with your empathy.
Requires thought. Yeah. Analysis.
And in the same way where you have a parent who does everything for their child, and then the child still resents the parent, even though they've done everything, but they've left them in a helpless state. Like, no, it was actually your job as a parent to not just do certain things for me, but to instruct me and give me the freedom to learn it on my own and learn some hard lessons so that I'm resilient.
Saying no, yeah. There's many times my 3-year-old is like, I can't do it, and then I say, well, keep trying, and then next time he tries, he does it. It's amazing. Yeah,
I'm sure that's a great feeling that you're like, no, just stick with it, on both ends.
I hope so. Yeah. Because I mean, it's I get feels about like not helping, because then you're like, oh my God. I mean, maybe this is my lack of self-esteem, but I'm like, my goodness, what, am I going to be that parent that never helps their child? He's going to think I never want to help him, but he keeps asking, so hopefully it's on the right track. But it would be so easy just to help him all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
In the short term, but Yeah, what you're saying is both in terms of short term or surface level. If your kid is, I don't have children, but I can imagine, like, if your kid is struggling with something, or they're feeling bad about something, your innate reaction is like, well, you want to, or at least a part of you is like, you want them to feel good. Like, you don't want them to feel like, if they're crying, like, oh, like, it's gonna be okay, like, you're fine. But also, bigger picture, sometimes it's like, well, you might be feeling bad now, but you'll be feeling a lot better in the long term if you just struggle with this for a little bit. Like, the struggle is good, depending on what it is, obviously. But
well, for a 3-year-old, it's emotion, and like Jordan said, is you gotta be a cold-hearted bastard because your child's crying, and you gotta say, yeah, that emotion that you feel, that's rough, man. Just keep feeling it through. It's okay to cry.
Yeah.
There's nothing I'm gonna do for you. I don't say that, but that's the fact. I'm not, as a father, and I can console him, but as far as words go, I'm not gonna tell him it's gonna be all right. It might not be. He might be crying, feeling sadness, and me telling him that it's gonna be all right will put the expectation in his mind that it should be all right. And then if an hour he's still feeling sad, he might feel like it's wrong to feel, or at least to admit it.
Yeah, and big picture, I feel like that big picture thinking, maybe it can be easier for some people with their family or with certain situations, but when it comes to politics or bigger,
well, I'll tell you why, because that when you're talking about your family or your friends, that's purposeful. You have purpose there.
Mhm.
And with politics, it's a little harder to find purpose.
Or the connection is a lot less. It's not as connected directly to you.
Yeah, even though it is.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
but in the things you see day to day, it's not like you interact with these people.
Yeah, it's not going to affect what I eat for breakfast. Yeah,
but in terms of policy and all that,
and that's long-term thinking.
You have to be not just rooted in emotion.
Yeah, because I don't know if anybody really notices, but our politicians are very long-term thinkers. This legislation is not just off-the-cuff reactionary. It's got consequences down the road, and it's got ideas for further legislation down the road too. With every bill that's proposed, is a bigger goal. It's not just like, oh, we want to give kids free lunches. There's something in the pipeline that has to do with who's providing those lunches, what companies, what contracts are going to be set up. Again, let's just rope it back into the healthcare system, and if we feed them bullshit for free breakfast, then we're just creating more customers for our healthcare lobbyists.
How much GMO glyphosate slop are you? Oh, it's free. Save money.
Yeah, that's pretty sick.
But
the consequences of not thinking, like, that's very pessimistic. Yeah, you could say that. You could make that argument. Oh, it's just pessimistic. But the consequences of not looking at it like that are way more severe, I think, than just being skeptical.
Well, just seeing it on the surface, like, well, what do you mean? Like, this is a good thing. And that's like the same debate that can come up with healthcare is like, well, I mean, I can relate to everyone having the ability to go to a doctor and not have to worry about bankruptcy, but also if the government is fully in charge of that, like, it's just, there's always, like, you have to think not just the surface level, like, yeah, guns kill people, so guns should be banned.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
well,
or like you're saying with the healthcare, that would be great. I would love for everyone to get like the healthcare they need and not go into medical debt over it.
Absolutely.
that sounds so great. So great. But you're right, the government in control of that, what else does that mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a.
It's not altruistic on the government's part. I don't think. And that's odd because old Barry Satoro there, he's been really, really highlighting his achievements in ACA.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah, I guess it's the 10-year anniversary. Or I don't even know.
Yeah, congratulations.
Something.
Not yeah, congratulations on forcing everyone that didn't have health care to pay a fine because they couldn't afford health care. Great job.
Yeah.
But even back to your other point, like of just, or maybe my point of being skeptical, like when I texted you about Michigan trying to make kindergarten mandatory, it's just your response was, oh yeah, force school on everybody so then you can force the jabs, get everybody jabbed. But that's a logical thinking conclusion. I mean, it sounds great, right? Like, oh, we're early childhood education will set them up. That's how they frame it. They'll set them up for later in life to be more successful because this study shows and that study shows. But at the same time, they're admitting like 95% of Michigan children are in kindergarten already. So why are you mandating the extra 5? Like, just by statistics alone, those other 5 might have other reasons outside of the norm that they're not in kindergarten.
Yep.
Unless it has some other further down the road consequence as far as legislation that will set it up for that in the future. Like this legislation is setting up. I always feel like, it's like in chess, you're moving your pawn. Oh, you're moving it 2 squares up. Big deal. It doesn't mean anything. Why not? But you're setting yourself up for further down the road, creating avenues for your stronger pieces.
Yeah, and that's like the people that or the people in Congress that'll propose something extreme, and then it's like they'll come back a month later with a much less extreme version of what they actually.
The art of the deal.
Yeah,
right there.
Like,
yeah,
let's negotiate now. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, never mind that the original proposal was so preposterous, you'd never accept it. But the fear of it actually being a reality will allow you to make certain concessions. Oh, your house has been on the market for 6 months? Let me give you an offer and then negotiate from there.
When it comes to, I wouldn't say solutions necessarily, but maybe a response or a way to address these issues of nihilism and hedonism, we go back to the benefits of religion, which are overlooked by a lot of people our age, and people have shunned God or religion for whatever reason. But when it came down to the totalitarian bullshit that we dealt with during COVID, a lot of people that didn't have these systems in place, didn't have principles, or didn't have a belief system at all, were very susceptible to going along with the agenda. And this clip from James Lindsay, who I think used to be an atheist, or maybe still is, but he at least is coming around to the idea that religion has benefits. He discusses this with Joe Rogan on a recent episode.
People who go along with it, who are in the cult, are treated as people, and the people who don't go along with it have to be treated as non-people. And that's Mao Zedong gave a famous speech in 1957 where he actually said, to not have a correct political orientation is like not having a soul. So you're no better than a capitalist running dogs. You're no better than the dogs. Well, I mean, we like dogs, but you know what I mean, how he would have meant it. And so it's like you're no better than an animal if you don't go along with this. And that's what you're saying. That's a cult. And all this bears the hallmarks of a cult.
And it feels like that is a natural pattern that humans fall into. And I think particularly if you're not religious, I think one of the things about religious people is they've already got their thing. So and hopefully it's one that promotes good values and it's a good thing. But there's a part in the brain that wants that thing. And atheists, they don't have a religion, and so they find a social religion. They find
social religion. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So they find it in their social circumstances, politics, economics, and it always goes demonic when they do that. I've been spending a lot of time, thanks to Charlie Kirk, I've been spending a lot of time paying attention to the tenets of Christianity and studying it, and it's got a lot of good advice in there. But you're 100% right that if you try to lack a religion, and the primary thing with the religion, so if you lack a religion, then it'll get filled in with other things for very many people. I think there's a small percentage of people for maybe that doesn't apply, but
there's a spot in your brain for it.
But the thing that, why do they go after Christians and Jews so hard everywhere they go? And the reason is because they are completely committed to, they're not, when you say, they already have their thing, for Christians and Jews, that's not how they think about God. It's not their thing. That's something that's above everything else.
Well, the Muslims as well.
Well, Muslims too. But Islam's a little bit different because it's got a political element worked into it. And I'm not trying to like throw shade. I'm just saying that the state is never above God in Christianity and Judaism. Ever. The state and God are somewhat intertwined, or can be in Islam, but it's not, so they're not quite identical, but it's true. The God is above state, no question. So when the state shows up and says to you, hey, you're going to do X, Y, Z or else, and it goes against your religion, if you're a Christian or Jew, and to many, if it's not Islam, a Muslim, you're going to say, no, I have a higher duty, and it's not to the state. And if you kill me, I'm going to a better place, so I don't care. And that's the enemy of totalitarianism in a way that nothing else is. The Confucian virtues of China don't have that. Buddhism actually kind of doesn't have that.
So true.
Yeah, it's a stopgap, but it's like a backstop to totalitarianism. Like, you're not going to just go along because I don't have that. I don't have that void. I have my purpose. I have my higher power. I have my authority doesn't come from, or like, I don't see you as being the highest authority.
Or your social situation.
Also that, you have that communal collective identity.
I mean, like your social situation doesn't dictate, because like with Christianity, it's a personal relationship, right? So anything outside of the personal shouldn't have the influence.
Yeah, and I've definitely come to see the value, and I mean, I don't, in terms of filling that void, just going along with any religion or whatever can have its downside too, but it can also provide a lot of purpose, structure, meaning, and a sense of like connection, and not, maybe not full on answers to all of the questions that we ask ourselves, but a little bit more grounding to prevent just being pushed easily one way or the other, and falling prey to like the current thing, or just trends, or doing something because everyone else is doing it,
Yeah, but you could argue that Christians do that.
Yeah, they could. They can, for sure.
Yeah, and then
It's
you
not
get
a
you get
it's not
to
a
the realm
perfect
of
measure in that way.
right. You get into the realm of a real Christian or not real, fake Christians.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, and that's a whole psyop. Like not a psychological op. It's just a psyop.
Yeah, and it's not to say that there's plenty of just whatever the Pope's been saying recently. It's like
I don't know. What's he say?
I don't.
You're flat yet or what? Come
Well,
on.
I think he repeated the line, "You're suicidal if you don't take the jab." He said that again.
Really?
Said that
Reason
again.
think it matters anymore?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know if he's taking the whatever.
Is he not meeting his quota? Like, what kind of line is that? In this
Well,
day?
him and Fauci are Jesuits, so I guess
Oh yeah,
there's probably some connection there. But
the big J's.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, when he's talking about Jews and Christians, like, and they don't, like, the state doesn't come before God. Like, well, the whole Israel thing is a little complicated with that, but
Yeah.
that's a whole other topic about it. But I mean, obviously, there are people that are sheeple who are religious.
Of course.
Of
course.
Probably
most.
It's not a perfect system by any means, and that's why I said it's not like, oh, all you have to do is just convert to whatever religion and you're gonna solve this problem, because I think it is a personal.
Maybe that's why it's such a
process.
threat, though. Maybe maybe they're not worried about this quote unquote Christian or Jew, but they're worried about the influence of the sheeple having something higher than the state. To kick them around.
Absolutely.
Influence
I think
the sheeple and say God is higher than the state, and everyone nods and says yes, God is higher than the state. And because I mean, if you can drum up fanaticism over science with, like, I don't know, 90% of the people not knowing, they couldn't tell you the steps in the scientific method, is just like right there. That tells me that if you drum people up. I mean, the Crusades have happened, so many wars, and this is often a criticism of religion, but that so many wars have been started and fought over religion, which is not true. They've just used religion as like a flag or a banner, to get as many people involved in those wars as possible. So that's probably why totalitarians fear religion. They don't fear God, but they fear religion.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people who are followers of scientism just shit on religion all day for all of the what you mentioned, the Crusades, religious wars, and all that.
Yeah.
I don't know if a war has been fought over science yet, but I mean, you could probably say a fifth generational war was fought over COVID. In the name of science.
Yeah, absolutely. So
it's a form of warfare.
We're in one right now.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, in that sense.
I mean, the science of when a fetus becomes a human, the science of climate. I mean,
gender.
How many things are being taken from people in the name of climate change?
God, it is actually that is the
war.
The fifth generation war is scientism.
I think so. I think
right.
Taking things from people is an act of war.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, in that sense, I mean, it's just, there's an irony to me because, the people that say, like science is above religion because it's based in reality. Facts. Yeah.
Yeah. Flying spaghetti monsters don't not fly here.
And that should have become pretty abundantly clear that's not the case anymore. But
well, really is a big mystery to me is people that are both religious and science, and that straddle the two religions. You know, they're,
Yeah.
they're steep deep in Christianity, mega churches possibly, and but at the same time advocate so fervently for nerdy stuff like science.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how those people operate in the world. I think they're deep down either confused or haven't really examined that contradiction or conflict, as it were.
Yeah, there's this very little self-reflection in that.
But I wanted to end with a clip.
Boy, you're gonna get us labeled all right playing James Lindsay,
Oh,
Thomas Sowell,
oh no.
JP.
I mean, that's like alt light in comparison to some other avenues, but oh well.
Yeah.
But Thomas Sowell, this interview I found it's from 1995. I just want to keep that in your mind, because the things that he's going to talk about, you know, we've seen some issues come up recently, and you realize, you know, this is 30 years ago, pretty much, how some things just really haven't changed. We've just become aware of them.
Now, you know, you can't decide where your kid's going to school. You can't decide whether or not they can move a halfway house for drug users next door to you or whatnot.
It's out of your control. The government decides
That's
that
right.
stuff.
The government decides too many things. They decide also how your children will be raised. You may have an idea about at what age children should be introduced to sex, and in what manner, with what kind of moral commitment.
You mean as a parent?
As a parent, yes. The schools have taken that over. By the time you even think about it, they've already had years, you know, of showing.
They're passing out condoms to these kids.
Passing out condoms is not even the half of it. They're showing motion pictures of naked couples engaging in sex, both homosexual and heterosexual, in the 7th grade. And if you complain about it, that's considered to be censorship.
You can't pull your kid out of school and say they don't have to put up with this stuff. I guess you could, no. But you'd be
well, if you have a private school to put him in, but you have compulsory attendance laws, and if you don't have the money for private schools, then you're stuck.
Where did this country get off the track and decide that the federal government should make most of our decisions?
Well, it started to some extent in the New Deal, but I think the 1960s is sort of the golden age, if you want to put it that way, of this whole mindset. And that's what the book's about. It's about a mindset. It's not about a series of policies, but of showing how in policy after policy, those who think a certain way will try to take over other people's decisions.
How do you characterize the liberal philosophy today from the conservative philosophy?
Oh, that's a tough one. I guess the main thing about the liberals, again, is that they think a program will do it. If there's something that they don't like in the society, you have to set up a program and that will solve the problem. I think one of the things one of the words they use a lot is solutions. And I argue here and elsewhere that there are no solutions. There are just trade-offs. So, for example, when Ralph Nader launched his attack against the Corvair many years ago, he said it's an unsafe car and it has these safety problems and those safety problems. And in some respects, he was correct, not all. But the fact is, there were other things that a Corvair would do that made it safer than other cars. And on net balance, it was as safe as the rest of them.
Are you saying there are no solutions to our problems as Americans?
There are no solutions to anybody's problems. There are trade-offs. You know, safety is a classic example. Every year, so many hundreds of thousands of people are vaccinated against measles, smallpox, those kinds of things. Now, this saves several hundred lives, it's estimated. It also causes brain damage to about 30 kids a year. Now, there are no solutions in that. There are just trade-offs.
What about crime? Take crime as an issue. Can we solve the crime issue or fundamentally solve it so it's reduced?
Well, then that's a trade-off. You don't solve it. There will always be crime. There always has been, but you want to keep it down to some level. It's not this astronomical thing we have today. For example, the liberals right now are saying, you know, crime has eased off in New York, and that's true. there were 6 times as much crime in New York a few years ago as there was in 1960. Now it's down to 5 times as much crime as there was in 1960. Now that's not what I regard as a great trend, unless it continues a lot more strongly.
Liberals think
Huh. Yeah.
There are no solutions, only trade-offs.
Which is a hard sell to maybe a section of society that is always looking for problems to have solutions. Because isn't that the thing? We got to find a problem so we can fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's do a program. Well, okay, that sounds great, but programs need money. Where are you going to get the money? Oh, let's just take it over here. Who's going to run it? They need to be paid.
Yep. We're dealing with that with the homeless situation here in Denver.
Exactly.
Buying hotels, and then so you gotta pay people to run the hotel.
Yeah.
Oh, are you gonna allow in anyone who's using drugs actively? Yeah, we're gonna do that. Okay.
Great.
All right. Well, that's a solution, right? That's a real sustainable solution. But I also in the beginning, when he's talking about the schools showing like porn of straight and gay porn to kids.
1995
1995
for sex ed, or
yeah,
I assume, right? Yeah.
Where was a part of it? Let me see.
The schools have taken that over. By the time you even think about it, they've already had years, of showing.
they're passing out condoms to these kids.
Passing out condoms is not even the half of it. They're showing motion pictures of naked couples engaging in sex, both homosexual and heterosexual.
And what Libs of TikTok got popularized a couple of years ago?
Right. Oh my god.
Only during COVID did we find this was really happening. But if it was happening in 95, it's probably happening before that too, So it's just one of those things where I bring that clip in just as perspective, because we think like, oh my God, look at how crazy it's gotten.
Right.
And it has gotten crazier than this in some aspect, but some things have just continued. We're just finally noticing what's going on, and that's across the board. Also with the vaccine issue that he mentioned also in this clip, that we didn't really know about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now it's pretty widely known that there are issues.
Yeah, it's interesting that Bayer started in 1990, like a couple years after they upped the schedule frequency, or however you want to call it, giving more vaccines.
Oh yeah, I didn't know it was 90. Yeah.
Yeah. But not to miss this point either too, that or ours, I think, for this show is there's always trade-offs, and I think the acceptance of that fact and the ability to analyze and balance those trade-offs is really don't see it a whole lot in the public square.
No, it's a lot of utopian thinking about
or doom or
doom. Yeah.
It's just no like, okay, like, well, let's go back to COVID, like, okay, so many people are going to die. Like, why lockdown? Is that trade-off worth it? I mean, you're ruining lives, like ruined your passion for the music scene. A lot of things, was that trade-off worth saving X amount of lives that were going to happen anyway? I mean, we ran into 1 million. Again, I'm ignoring the fact that flu disappeared that year, cancer disappeared that year, car accidents disappeared that year. All the other forms of death seem to be non-existent because we were safe in our homes. But somehow, like, 1 million people died. Would have been more or less if we didn't lock down,
Yeah, that never came into the discussion because everyone was just emotional.
everybody did the same thing. So there was
Grandma.
no way to figure it out. Yeah, grandma. Yeah.
Grandma was like the shield.
Yeah. I mean, I care so much more about your grandma than you do that I'm going to take your rights away.
And I'm not going to let you see grandma either. That's how much I care about her.
Yeah, dehumanize you
Sure.
both for it. Like, how dehumanizing is that to be in hospice or dying and you have to look at your family through a window?
Yeah, I think speaking of disconnected compassion and empathy that those people claim to be,
but that's the trade-off that was never thought
exhibiting.
about.
Yep.
Never discussed.
Or if you tried to discuss it, it was going back to the first clip with Yuri Bezmenov, where it's like, oh, look at how many people are going to suffer from this. Like, facts don't matter. I'm demoralized. I'm just going to go along with the science.
Yeah. The discussion was the struggle.
Yeah.
The discussion was pain. The discussion was suffering. Yeah, that's insane. Yeah.
And the hysteria and the panic and the fear, all that prevents any kind of rational discussion about really anything. And that's why you have to, with trade-offs, the idea, there's a trade-off to just being purely emotional, and there's a trade-off to being purely logical and based in thought,
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't try to balance those things or use some thought, some feeling, then you're missing the whole picture, And maybe you could say sometimes the right is too logical or doesn't use its empathy or compassion enough or whatever, or gets into the doom and gloom black pills. And that's another episode, but in general, I feel like when you combine all those factors together, it allows for the outcomes to be filled in and guided along by somebody that's not in the room with you,
Absolutely.
And we want to try to avoid that.
Well, even though you are not a doctor, my friend, I feel that this was very therapeutic, and I have taken away a lot of coping mechanisms.
Oh yeah,
to bring about in my daily life.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all need maintenance from time to time, and it's good to check in.
Yeah. Well, thanks for hanging in and bringing all this to the table.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.
Absolutely. All right. Check you soon.
All right. Bye.